Hey Hermits, welcome back to my channel. It's Dara here, and today we are going to be wrapping up all of the books that I read in August and September. Now I know I usually do this each month, but honestly it didn't feel particularly worth doing, and I didn't feel particularly like talking in the month of August because I was in such a massive slump. A slump for reading, a slump for filming, a slump for editing, a slump for talking about books, like anything book related. I was just not in the mood for in August, which was unfortunate because, as you know, I did commit to Veda, which is video every day, in August, and I ended up just giving myself permission to not keep going because here's the thing, I'm the kind of person who follows through with things. It's a point of pride for me. I always follow through with what I'm going to say. And sometimes that does me a disservice. Sometimes I end up getting burnt out. Sometimes I end up just feeling really down. And that's not how I want to be when it comes to my reading. For me, reading is a hobby. It's an outlet. It's a passion. It's not something that I want to force myself to do for arbitrary reasons. So instead of doing what I usually do, which is power through, I just gave myself some grace and I let myself do other things for fun instead. I gave myself permission to, binge watch box sets that I've seen a dozen times. I gave myself permission to start getting crafty again and, enjoy myself in other ways. And the good news is, I feel like it helped me get my reading mojo back. So my intention is to start bringing the regular videos back. Like, I am inspired again, I am reading again, which is the perfect blend for having a channel like this one. So without further preamble, let's dive into the books that I read in August. We'll start there for obvious reasons. So like I said, I was in a massive slump in August, which actually happens to me every year. Historically, July is always my best reading month, and then August is always my worst. And I definitely want to break that cycle next year. I do not want another month of barely any reading next year because honestly, I just don't feel like my best self when that is the case. So the first book that I read in the month of August was Power Hour by Adrian Herbert. And this is, a self-help, personal development type book that is essentially telling you to wake up an hour earlier and do something productive with that time. It is not a new concept. It's like literally nothing new in this book. And for that reason, I felt very lackluster about it. Like, honestly, I can't remember a single original idea that I found in there. It was written very much for people with athletic aspirations. So, if your goal is running a marathon or some such, then maybe the examples that she used will really resonate with you. For me, I was just very meh. And it could be just because, I'm a life coach, I'm a business coach, like I know productivity and I know, sort of brain chemistry in great depth. And this was not an in great depth kind of book. However, because the subject matter was so familiar to me, it was quite a good way of like getting started with reading again, because I started the month of August reading nothing. Like for I think 7 or 8 days, I didn't read a page. And I picked this one up at the library and immediately just found myself able to read a chapter a day and just get back into a rhythm of reading something. So even though it wasn't a favourite and I probably won't remember to recommend it to anyone in the future, it was a good way of getting me back into the swing of things. The second book that I read in August, and do we call this a book? I don't know. So this was one of those stories that starts out being like a promoted Facebook post that comes up in your feed about, smutty, dramatic werewolves. And then it takes you to one of those apps where you can unlock chapters at a time. So I read a story called The Perfect Luna. I believe the author is Marissa Meyer. I might be wrong. And, she writes exclusively for one of those apps. And it was not well written. Like there was clearly no editing happening. Like it was that kind of writing where like it felt like it was the first draft, so it's like she didn't even edit it herself, let alone anybody else. But despite all of that, I had a great time reading it. It was ridiculous, it was fantastical, it was you know, high drama, but I had a fun time. So it was essentially about this world where there are werewolves living among us and other were creatures. So there are also were cats and were bears and, you know, other creatures who are sort of having a bit of a civil war situation going on. And the way that the packs are structured is you have the alpha and a Luna who is his mate. And this is a society where people have like fated mates, but they can also have chosen mates. And our story starts with our main character, whose name I cannot recall, having her chosen mate reject her because he's found his fated mate. And yeah, that's where we're starting off. And there's also like a time travel element, so we realise that she's actually lived that conversation before and all of the catastrophic events that came after that, and so now she's trying to rewrite history. And it was a fun, silly time. It was. The next book that I read in the month of August was Wicker by Harmony Nice, and this is kind of a non-fictional guide to the religion of Wicca, but from like a modern young woman's perspective. So Harmony Nice has a YouTube channel with some great content on there. She doesn't upload anything anymore, but I believe she's still active on Instagram. And because I like her videos, I really wanted to like this book more. But again, because I am very well versed in the subject matter of like witchcraft and spirituality, it felt very surface level. Now, I think if you are just coming to this subject and looking for an introductory guide, this would be a great place to start, because you did get, you know, like a fairly comprehensive overview of a lot of different areas. But for somebody like me, who again has gone into great depth into this kind of stuff in the past, it just, I don't know, it lacked a bit of something. The next book that I read in the month of April was called The Vanishing by Jane Ann Krentz, and this was very reminiscent of Haven. If you ever watched the TV show Haven, it gave me like those kind of vibes. So there was this small town called Fog Lake where something happened a few generations ago. There was some kind of explosion, and after that took place, suddenly the residents started noticing that they had different gifts and their children were born with different gifts. So it could be things like empathy, it could be mind reading, aura reading, like all kinds of like spooky skills like that. And we are following one of the women who was born in this town, and her best friend, you know, they grew up together. They both have gifts, and they have started a company of sort of they're private eyes, they're private investigators, and you know, they use their gifts to help them in some cases. And then close to the start of the story, our main character's best friend disappears, and you know, she's trying to figure out what happened, but she's not the only one. So there is also kind of a governing body of people with these skills and like objects with these like sort of magical purposes or powers. And so she ends up reluctantly having to work with this guy, this from the organization, to unravel the mystery, find the friend, and see what's going on. Now, I know I haven't described it very well, but I enjoyed the concept. I enjoyed the vibe. The execution, however, lacked something for me. Like, I think this would make an exceptional film or TV show. I think that it had a lot of potential, but the reality is the characters were so incredibly two-dimensional. Like, there was no chemistry or spark between anybody. Like, you didn't find yourself particularly rooting for anyone. And we have this like main guy and main girl who suddenly you find out that they are in love with each other after having known each other for like 2 or 3 days, and they're, you know, like having sex and stuff, but there is literally no chemistry, there is no spark, there is no like flirting up until that point. Like honestly, you would think that they were sort of colleagues that tolerate each other but don't really interact up until the point where they're in the bedroom doing stuff, and it was just a bit, I don't know, it lacked heart. The idea for the plot was great, the idea for the world was great, but there was just like the human element missing for me. The next book that I read in the month of August was Art Magic by Molly Roberts, and this is another book written by a YouTuber. I highly recommend you check out her channel if you love getting magical, or if you love art, or a bit of both. So this book is it's an art book, really. It's an instructional art book that shows you different projects that you can make that sort of draw on spiritual concepts and witchcraft, and it's a lot of fun. Like there are definitely things in there that I really want to make, so I'm glad I picked that one up. It was also a very quick read. I'm just looking down at my iPad to make sure I've mentioned everything, but I'm pretty sure that that is everything I read in the month of August. Now let's move on to September. Again, September for me started out with me not really reading anything. I didn't really know what I was in the mood for, like nothing appealed to me. But then I would say a week into the month, I came down with a really bad cold. It was not a fun time, and I spent the weekend in bed just trying to knock it out of my system because I had a busy time coming up at work. And while I was in bed, I was feeling really sorry for myself, so I decided to pick up an old favourite. So I picked up an old series that I loved when I was like 12, and I never actually finished the series. I read, I think, the first maybe 5 books in the series, and I think there are 13 books in the series. There might actually be more than 13, I'm not sure. But I recently picked them up, like the full collection, at a charity shop, and they're right here, just sitting here on my shelf. And so I started from the beginning and had a fantastic time. Now again, these are objectively not good books. The writing is fairly basic, the characters are like fairly flat. We have like 2 soulmate insta-love situations with the same person in this series that literally I think the entire series spans about maybe 4 months. So, you know, it's silly, and it's clearly written for much younger people. However, the nostalgia was strong. So I haven't actually told you what the book series is, so let me just grab one off here. I'll grab book number 1. So book number 1 is Book of Shadows by Kate Tiernan. And so this series, in the UK, it was published as Wicker, and in the US, I believe it's called Sweep. And yeah, it's just a silly fun time. It is a silly fun time, and I have no regrets about reading it, honestly. I read 7 of them. So I read Book of Shadows, which is book 1, The Coven, which is book 2, Blood Witch, which is book 3, Dark Magic, which is book 4, Awakening, which is book 5, Spellbound, which is book 6, and The Calling, which is book 7. And I do still have, I think, 7 or 8 to go. But the rest that are to follow, I haven't read before. So I don't know if they're going to have that same magic for me, because a big piece of my enjoyment was based on the nostalgia rather than like the actual books. But this tells the story of a girl named Morgan who, like, she's you know, she's not like other girls. She's weird, she's awkward, she's flat-chested. And the fact that she's flat-chested is brought up multiple times in every book, as was often the case in books published in like 2001, which is when all of these came out. And, you know, that's pretty much her defining personality trait, is that she is not a morning person. She loves Diet Coke and she's flat-chested. Like that's it. That's what she has to offer the world. And she's at school one day when this handsome, mysterious guy walks in. And, you know, immediately she's like, oh my God, he's so handsome. Oh my God, he never noticed me. And of course he does. Like, he notices her and invites her along to this gathering, which turns out to be like a witchy circle. And he creates this coven, and like as part, like because she's clearly obsessed with him, she's like, oh yeah, like I'll come along, no big deal, with some other people from the school. And she finds out that she is actually a blood witch. Like, she's descended from a line of witches, and so we're seeing her come to terms with this being part of her identity that she didn't actually know about. And we're also seeing sort of snippets from the past, so we don't always know who these past snippets are from. Like, sometimes it's people from like the guy Cal's history, sometimes it's her ancestors. Like, we are just being given some backstory slowly but surely. And like I said, it's a fun time. It's a fun time. The next book that I read in the month of September was Grimoire of a Kitchen Witch by Rachel Patterson. So this is another like non-fictional guide to witchcraft. I've just been very much in the mood to dive into that subject matter again, because it has been a while since I read anything new on the topic. And this one, like, we had some new stuff which I really enjoyed. So we had some original ideas, some like recipes and things to try out, some like different meditations to try, which was fun. But again, a lot of the information in there is stuff that I've read before, but I did kind of enjoy the tone. So it was very conversational, so you could imagine somebody just saying these things to you if they were explaining it to you face to face, which I often like in non-fiction. Like, sometimes I think people think that non-fiction has to be very dry and very clinical and very detached, and that wasn't the case with this one. And so yeah, writing style wise, it flowed really well. Information wasn't necessarily new to me. I do think this one was a lot better than the other witchy book that I was talking about earlier, so Wicker by Harmony Nights. Like, I thought this one was just more comprehensive, more interesting. But yeah, nothing more to say on that one really. And then we get to some really good ones. So up until now, I feel like my reading for August and September had been mediocre at best. And I don't know if this is just because of the mood I was in or because of the actual books that I was reading, but these last two really made me feel like I was back on track. So first we have A Taste of Her Own Medicine by Tasha L. Harrison, and this was a small town, like, cozy autumnal romance situation, and I absolutely freaking loved it. Loved it. So we are following our main character, Sonia, who has just come out of a divorce. Like, she's been a housewife for many, many years. She married her high school sweetheart, and now she's sort of having to navigate life after this very, like, surprising to her divorce. And so she decides that she is starting her own business. Like, she needs to find a way to take care of her kids. And she is like very witchy herself. So she was raised in a family of healers. So her mother has an apothecary. And so I believe their heritage is Gullah, which is like a Creole branch. And so that's the sort of school of magic that we're rooted in here. So it's very like herbal, very healing, and I had a great time reading this. I thought it was so much fun because you see her like really exploring her like her roots, her ancestral roots, and her like magic, but then she's also really wanting to make it a financially successful venture. So she's taking this business course, and the guy who runs it is our love interest, who is rather dashing, and we're seeing like their relationship unfold, and like her insecurities as an older woman who doesn't have all of this experience, and his sort of issues that come with, like, you know, like his family history and not wanting to get too close to people. And I just had a great time reading it. I will say that the first couple of chapters I read and I was just like, oh my god, like this is not good. But then chapter 3 from then on, amazing. And I think it's not that the first few chapters weren't good, it's that the pacing was questionable, because it seemed like maybe a third of the way through the first chapter these two people are thrown together and already they're basically eye-fucking each other and like having like really like blatant flirty conversations that just felt inauthentic and awkward. And part of me wonders if that was supposed to be the point, because I think they both were quite awkward together and second guessing what the other one thought. I don't know, it didn't feel particularly comfortable to read. If that was the point, then great job, Tasha. But like I said, from chapter 3, spectacular, loved it, absolutely loved it. And then the last book that I read in the month of September was Dead Letters by Kate Dolan Leach. And this is a story of some dysfunctional sisters, actually twins. And this is a trope that I love. Like, I love stories about sisters, and when they're messed up, even more so. So this tells the story of, like I said, twins, Ava and Zelda. Ava has been living abroad in Paris because she needed to escape something that went on back home, something that is revealed throughout the story. But she gets an email, yes, an email, one day to let her know that Zelda is dead. She was burned to death in the family barn. And so she's like, okay, I need to go home. So she flies home to the vineyard where she lives, and you meet this, you know, cast of quite dysfunctional characters. It's like very small town, very insular, and everyone has secrets, everyone has messes. And she's convinced that her sister is not dead. Like, she's convinced that she would feel something. And funnily enough, she's not there very long before she starts getting emailed from her supposedly dead sister, who is leaving kind of like puzzles and riddles for her to unravel to find her. And so we are following this mystery as we go, and like really learning about what's been going on back home while she's been away. And it's a really fun time. It really kept me guessing. Like, I didn't see where it was going. Like, I am usually pretty good at unraveling a mystery and seeing, you know, the plot twists coming. And there was a good chunk that I didn't expect in this one. And that always makes me happy. It always makes me feel like I've been well entertained and I've picked my book really well. So I would definitely recommend those last two books that I read in September. I would recommend both of them very, very highly. But you can see with my increasing level of enthusiasm that I am very much feeling like I'm back. I'm feeling in the mood for reading. I'm feeling in the mood for filming, and yeah, really happy to report that that's the case. So I would love to hear from you in the comments. I would love to hear, what is the best book that you read in either August and or September? Let me know. But without further ado, I'm going to love you and leave you. So go have a fabulous rest of your day, and I will see you in my next upload.